This episode is brought to you by LTL Mandarin School. Are you learning Mandarin? Check out ltl-school.com to find out how you can speed up your learning. You're listening to the Live the Language podcast with your hosts, Max and Campbell.
Welcome back to another episode of Live the Language. You're with Campbell and Max here, and today we're asking the question, what is a good gift to give a Chinese person? Now, some of you, I'm sure, have had this problem in the past. You've got a Chinese friend, or maybe you're in China and there's a special occasion, there's a birthday, there's Chinese New Year's coming up. And what do? It's a completely different culture. I'm sure, you know, in our cultures, you've got different gift-giving etiquettes. So today we're asking the question, what is an appropriate gift to give a Chinese person? Max, do you have any experience with this?
Yeah, this is quite a tough topic actually, because it is so different to what we do in the West. I just want to congratulate you first as well, Campbell, for getting that right on the fourth take. So I had to get that in there. Yeah, gift giving in China, it's there's a lot of hurdles that you kind of have to overcome without even maybe realising. And there's a lot of things you need to dodge, things you should do, things you shouldn't do. And you do have to be careful and quite selective over what you get. So it does feel like a bit of a minefield. I think once you've done it a couple of times, it's not so difficult. You kind of know what to do and what not to do. So as a very basic example, China is a very superstitious country, and they have numbers that they simply avoid. One of those numbers is the number 4. The number 4 in Chinese is pronounced si. And actually that sounds very similar to the word for death, which is si. It's actually spelt the same, but it's a different tone. And China tends to avoid the number 4 as much as they can. I mean, even crazy instances where hotels don't have rooms with the number 4. In the lift, the 4th floor doesn't exist, things like that. So avoiding certain things like that is important. I mean, there's a whole list of things which we could go through, which could probably last for hours. But there's definite do's and don'ts. How about yourself?
I think I perhaps fall to a default of giving alcohol as a gift. And I think it doesn't matter what culture I'm in. And thankfully, I've recently learned that that's a good thing to do if someone's hosting you. And I'm sure no one's taken offense by, a bottle of Jack Daniels as a gift. So that's gone all right. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is money. How much money you should spend typically on these gifts. And that's not a unique problem to being in China. What should you do? So one of the things that we've learned is in the workplace environment, which I found this quite interesting, is you should always give the most expensive gift to the most senior person and then kind of work your way down from there and not give the same gift to everyone. That, I guess, can be insulting, can be interpreted that way. So yeah, that's quite interesting. And then outside of that, buying things that are too expensive can be a little bit embarrassing if the other person doesn't feel like they could reciprocate, or frankly just they might interpret it as a bribe,
right,
which I thought was quite interesting. So I'm sure there's a sweet spot on price, but basically in my research of this, basically it was saying don't go overboard.
Yeah, and a lot of kind of life in China is all about face, isn't it? Saving face, losing face. They do things very differently here to maybe how we would. They wouldn't maybe confront something if something was not right. And it's a lot of the time a game almost with face, saving it and not losing it and not putting someone in the position where they could lose face. And whereas, perhaps in the Western world you could get your boss or your colleague or perhaps somebody underneath you the same gift and it would be well received. Here it would probably make for quite an awkward coming weeks, because it's widely regarded that you should spend the most money on the person higher up, and if you're spending more money on somebody at your level or below you, then it's a bit odd, which is quite crazy really. Actually just buying gifts in China I find quite difficult anyway. I mean, in England you're never more than 10 minutes away from being able to buy a birthday card or wrapping paper, and currently we live in Beijing, one of the biggest cities in the world, and I can never ever find wrapping paper, and to buy a card, except buying maybe on Taobao or Jingdong, to actually walk the streets and find a card is such a challenge. And it just becomes a daily chore, and it's quite crazy really. But yeah, going back to kind of what we were saying before, it is important to know who you're buying for and their status on the ladder, let's say, especially if it's a work colleague.
Max, let me just preemptively say that I personally don't adhere to these cultural rules. So if you'd like to buy me an iPad at Christmas and everyone else something smaller, I'm very comfortable with that.
See what Santa brings.
Interesting thing, you mentioned the wrapping paper, and that does actually come into play in China to some degree. As we've mentioned already, Chinese people can be superstitious around the numbers, and so it shouldn't really come as a surprise that colours as well can also be very superstitious. So as a rule of thumb, something you should know is in China, red is always good. Red's a lucky colour. Gold can mean wealth, and pink and yellow, also two fiery colours, can mean happiness. So these are basically your safe colours. Right.
Yeah. I suppose if you're ever not sure, just think of the China flag, and you've got the red and you've got the gold in there. On National Day and National Week in China, everyone's got their flags. There's red everywhere. There's the symbol for luck and money. So if you're ever not sure, I always kind of advise newbies to just think of the flag.
Yes. But there is one important thing you should know about red, and I learnt this. I thought it was quite interesting. I found this out. I was a teacher here in China when I first arrived, and I went to grade someone's paper, and I wrote their name with red ink.
Ooh.
And my co-teacher lost her mind that I had used a red pen, something that I thought was innocent at the time, and the history behind that is quite interesting. So basically back in the, I don't know what era, but basically prisoners on death row, their names would be written with chicken blood, with red blood. Obviously they don't do this today, but it's remained very superstitious that if you write someone's name in red ink, you're wishing death and ghosts and evil upon this person. So red wrapping paper, good choice. When it comes time to writing their name on the card, you need a black or a blue pen. Don't stray from that.
Just to confuse it even more. Yeah, no, it's a bit of a minefield. I suppose there's other things that we can touch on here, which we actually covered in our blog on our website. When giving the gift, it's also good to use both hands and general politeness. And I think something that we do, or we have a habit of doing in the West, is when we receive a gift, we like to open it straight away. As the gift giver, it's nice to see their face when they open the gift, and as the receiver, it's nice to open it straight away because of excitement. But if you give a gift to someone here in China, don't expect them to open it in front of you. It's very much a private thing. They don't like to do it publicly. This maybe comes back to the thing with face in China, where every gift I'm sure is well received, but if they don't like it, it's very easy for us to always say, "Oh, that's great, I love it, thanks. Have you got the receipt?" Whereas again, obviously here they would never do that because they would never confront in that way. So using both hands is generally seen as a sign of respect, and it's just important to make sure you kind of cover the right steps and don't kind of fall over any. I'm going on. I don't even know what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, I think we can move on to, this is the thing that I want to talk about, which is a list of unwelcome gifts. Now, this thing is quite interesting. I'm not sure if there are any, speaking from my own culture in Australia, I can't think of a time when my parents ever told me, don't ever give a person X as a gift. I've never had that. I guess maybe Australians aren't that superstitious about things. So looking at quite a large list of gifts not to give. So let's just quickly run through these. Firstly, sharp objects are no-no. So don't give any knives, cutting implements. Handkerchiefs, this is a funny one. Handkerchiefs, it looks like you're saying goodbye forever. So, yeah, you might start some tears if you give a handkerchief. Max already mentioned four of anything. However, numbers 6 and 8 are good. So Max, don't give me 4 iPads. 6 and 8 is probably going to be better.
Preferably 88.
88. Wow. I don't know why anyone would give any of these following gifts, but ornamental stones and dolls, kind of creepy. But Max, steer clear of them. And then this one I found quite interesting: green hats. Max, do you know the story behind why you wouldn't want to give a Chinese person a green hat?
I think I do, but enlighten me.
Okay, so during the Yuan dynasty, family members of prostitutes were made to wear green hats. They don't do that anymore, thankfully. But today, if you were to give someone a green hat, you would not so subtly be telling them that their partner is being unfaithful.
Right, so avoid.
Please, no giving of green hats. Yeah, so these are just a list of a few things that you should always avoid in giving, and a few things you should know about the techniques. Max, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to today's episode.
Yeah, there was just touching on those gifts there. There is actually a reasoning behind some of these, and it's because basically in Chinese lots of words sound very similar, and some of these gifts sound like bad words. So as an example, the word for shoes in Chinese is xie, and actually it's exactly the same sound for the word evil, which is also xie, but it's just written differently. So the reasoning generally behind these gifts being bad is because they have some sort of connotation to the bad word, as we discussed earlier with the number 4 and death.
Yeah, it sounds like they just sound similar.
Yeah, and in fact, some of them sound exactly the same. So if you're listening, there's no way you can tell them apart except for context.
Wow.
But when you're reading it, there is a difference. So they're written differently, but they sound the same. Which just makes our job learning Chinese that bit harder.
I could come and say, hey Max, I got you a pair of evil spirits.
Exactly.
Excuse me?
Hopefully it was shoes, but
you never know with me.
Yeah. But no, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Great. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to read more about some gift giving etiquette or some more unwelcome gifts, head on over to our blog. But that's it for today, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.